Welcome to episode 236 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak life, encouragement, and truth into the minds and hearts of educators and get you energized for the week ahead. Today, we're talking high-impact, low-burnout strategies for differentiating your lessons. Visit truthforteachers.com to get an easy-to-read, easy-to-share blog post version of this podcast episode. And you'll get a sneak peek at our new Truth for Teachers Writers Collective that's launching soon. Teachers, if you need inspiring science and math lessons for K-8, try Generation Genius for free. You'll get instant access to hours of fun and engaging videos covering over 200 topics that students will actually love. Every video comes with a ton of resources, including lesson plans, discussion questions, exit tickets, activities, and more. Generation Genius is used in over 20,000 schools, and you can get a free month's trial at generationgenius.com/truth. That's generationgenius.com/truth. If you missed out on the 40-hour Teacher Workweek full year program that launched this summer, check out the 6-week fast track version. It gives you just the most impactful strategies for streamlining and simplifying your workload as a K-12 teacher. All materials are released up front, so you can work at your own pace, and you never lose access to the course. It's discounted right now to $39, and it includes my favorite tips and resources from the full year program for organization, email management, lesson planning, grading, and more. So if you didn't want to commit to the entire year's program and you like the idea of something shorter and condensed, go to join.40htw.com, and you can click on Fast Track. You'll also see the 40-hour instructional coaching and 40-hour leadership programs for school admins there. If you want to make teaching a more sustainable career path by finding that overlap between what's best for kids and what's best for educators, go to join.40htw.com to learn about all the different 40-hour workweek programs that are available. Differentiating learning for every student in your classroom can be incredibly exhausting and time-consuming. And that's why I've invited Dr. Laura Fitzpatrick on the show to talk about some streamlining tips. Laura has been a 6th grade English language arts teacher for the past 8 years. She earned an MA in Special Education and an educational doctorate in inquiry-based learning, where her research primarily centered on teacher burnout. Laura is also a writer for the Truth for Teachers Collective, and she wrote an article about 6 high-impact, low-burnout strategies to differentiate for neurodivergent kids. To put it more simply, Laura is sharing 6 ways to differentiate without drowning. Listen in. So your first tip is that cloning is possible. What do you mean by that?
Ooh, I feel like whenever we talk about differentiation, I just automatically think, gosh, I wish there were one of me for every one of my students. That would just make life so much easier. And I found that the closest I can come to that is by screencasting. And screencasting is pretty incredible. You could use something like Loom or Screencastify. There are so many options to record yourself ahead of time so that it frees you up in the classroom to be with your students. So I think about, I'm a 6th grade English language arts teacher, and so we're doing a lot of writing. And I wish I could sit down next to each of my students and really coach them through the writing process, but that is just physically impossible. So what I essentially do is I take a rubric, let's say there are 5 parts to it, and I think, okay, what are the common pitfalls that I see in 6th grade writers in these 5 areas that they're going to be assessed on? And then I make 5 videos. So as I am reading through their work, I'm like, okay, so they definitely need work on this one component of the rubric. I then highlight that on their rubric. When they get it back, they see, okay, I've got one thing highlighted. I know that corresponds to one video that I need to watch. So it's the closest thing I found to being able to sit down one-on-one with students, because they get to sit and watch that video of me kind of walking them through areas where they are going to grow as a writer. So you could do that for needs-based elements like I just shared, or you could do that strengths-based by highlighting something on the rubric that they're doing really well and then kind of pushing them in a video made for them. I think it's really, really helpful. I know for me, having like 130 students, not making 130 videos, that would be absolutely insane, but instead making 5 and kind of capturing those needs and then being able to differentiate in that way. So basically, what I try to do is have students, let's say, submit a piece of work on, I don't know, let's say a Thursday. And then I take time to look over them. And the key here is I'm not grading, I'm just looking for areas of growth. And so then I'm looking at the rubric, just quick checking over their work, highlighting a spot where I'm like, yep, they're going to need help with this, highlighting it on the rubric. And then typically over the weekend, I make those 5 videos. And I'm talking like maybe 5 minutes per video. So we're talking 25 minutes of your time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm making those videos over the weekend based on the trends I'm seeing in their work. Like, ooh, everybody's kind of missing this one aspect. Then we take time on Monday. They get their work back, and it doesn't really even have anything on it except just for a highlighted part on the rubric. So that's why it's fast for you to do and get kind of a quick turnaround time. Then they know, okay, I've got this part highlighted that corresponds to this video. I might have the links posted around the room, so they know what their specific link is. And then they spend that day watching the video and going back. They could be revising on their own. They could meet up with other people who have that part highlighted on their rubric and kind of compare notes a bit. They could meet up. I've even had people meet up with other students who specifically do not have that highlighted, because that means, hey, I'm meeting up with you. You were really good at this ahead of time, so kind of coach me through this. I watched the video. How do you think my revisions are? So it really takes a day for them to have that moment to pause, reflect, watch the video, and then respond accordingly. But for you as the teacher, it's a really quick turnaround time because you're not getting into the nitty-gritty grading. You're just kind of looking for a general trend. And then once they turn it in with their revisions, it's super fast because you look at their rubric, you're like, hey, I highlighted the intro, so that's the part I'm going to look at for a second time. You don't have to look at all the other stuff again because you already know they did okay on that. You're just zeroing in on the one part that you've already given them feedback that, hey, you need to go back and revise this. So even though it's like, oh my gosh, I'm grading something twice, it really is not that overwhelming, because the first one is a quick run through, and then the second one, you're zeroing in on one focus area that you've had them work on correcting and growing in.
Okay, so the first strategy then for high impact low burnout is that cloning is possible with screencasts. Your second strategy is that stations are for everyone. How do you use stations?
Stations, I feel like a lot of times people associate that with elementary school. And I'm a middle school teacher, so sometimes when I say stations, they're like, what? That's not something we do. But I have found stations to be so helpful. Again, this is you'll notice a trend here. It's some front loading because you are doing the work ahead of time to be able to free yourself up in the moment to actually be with your students. But I think of a way I saw this in a math classroom is that the teacher created 5 stations, and they were these, elaborate word problems with all these different elements to it that really were rich for students to dig into. And then essentially the students were put into small groups, and they had 5 days, 1 day per station, and they were working through those 5 big intricate problems. And the teacher even had these big whiteboards set up, so it was like small group think kind of a thing, and the teacher was able to rotate to each of the groups. And how the teacher differentiated was by how they grouped the students. So if they knew, okay, this group is really struggling with this one component, maybe it's as simple as understanding the language of the word problem, then the teacher knows, okay, when I go to this group, we're going to really focus on unpacking the prompt and understanding the language of it. So what I love about stations is that you can differentiate in so many ways, from grouping to what the actual station tasks are. But the thing I love the most is that you get to partner with the students. You're not just like passively sitting at your desk. You're actually up with them and working through the stations alongside them, really kind of modeling a thought process for them and being able to reach them as they're in the thick of it, working through that particular skill. And that's ultimately the goal of differentiation, that you can work alongside them, that you can be there in those hard moments of learning and really help them get to the other side of understanding.
Yes, and that does require front loading, as you said. But, the more that I talk to teachers who feel pretty balanced in their workload and also feel like they're running a very student-centered classroom and they're able to teach in really new and innovative ways, what I hear is that they're spending much more time on front loading and far less time on things like lesson planning. Because when you're creating those activities, then as you mentioned that like that those math stations took 5 days for students to go through. So that's 5 days of lesson plans that you're not having to do,
Yeah,
and that you're not draining all your energy in instruction on those days,
right.
and teaching. Standing in front of a classroom and explaining things is draining.
Mhm.
Being able to move around and work with students in groups and going from this station to that station and, asking questions and really probing kids thinking, that's a different kind of energy expenditure. And so what I hear a lot of teachers who teach in this way is that it's much less tiring
Yeah.
than a more traditional way of teaching. Have you found that?
Yes, absolutely. I really feel as though this way of teaching restores your joy. It
Yes.
really is. It's those moments of getting to work alongside students that I always said I wanted to be a teacher because I love aha moments. And you don't get those if you're just standing up front. It's like
Mhm.
silent mental aha moments for them if they're even checked in with you. But if you are alongside them and you're able to not only experience those moments of brilliance with them, but you also get those little side chatter conversations about the game last night, and you get to hear about the new sneakers they got or whatever. It naturally happens within that context because we all know that learning is social, and so social components happen inside of that academic talk. And really, that is a beautiful way to restore the joy of teaching, is remembering these are humans that I get to shepherd, and humans that I get to teach and work alongside of. And that is a beautiful thing. And that is, like you said, it's a different way to expend your energy, but it is so much more fulfilling than just standing up front.
Yes. So your third strategy is that knowing the power of delegation and being able to delegate. What does that look like?
Well, as as a middle school teacher, I always get like, people clutching their heart when they're like, "Oh my gosh, you have middle schoolers who are co-teachers. What does that even mean?" And they just cannot even fathom that. But it really is a beautiful thing. I have a lot of peer teachers that I use in my classroom, and I think it's important to note that students who are named a peer teacher don't just like automatically get to wear that badge all year long. It's
Mhm.
definitely something that is skill based. So, just as an example, let's say we're working on dialogue in writing. And so we are working through this skill, and then ultimately, for a performance task, one of the elements of the writing is that they have to include dialogue. So I would go back to where we have practiced that and say, okay, who has really mastered the skill of this rich dialogue? Okay, well, these people per class period, perfect. And you know what? Somebody who's great at dialogue is somebody who might not be an A student, but they have shown mastery in that area, and so therefore they are a candidate for being a peer teacher. So let's say we're going through a revising and editing process for our performance task. I would have different stations based on different correction areas, and if one of those stations is dialogue, I would pick those students who've demonstrated mastery and pull them in for lunch. And this is so fun. I always make it like a big, just a big hoopla, like, wow, you've been selected as the peer
Mhm.
teacher this time. And they get so excited. I typically partner them just because it's less intimidating that way. And equip them with, hey, here's what it's going to potentially look like. Here's what we need to articulate as we're walking them through revising and editing for dialogue. Here are the things to be looking for and help coach them through. And then from there, I really just let them run with it and give them a few days to prep. So it's hilarious. Some of them go home and they're like, Mom, I need whiteboards. I need markers. They go all out. They bring in all the supplies. And others are like more of a wing it approach, and that's okay too. But I just find that it's pretty incredible when you prep it the right way. And what I mean by that is establishing a classroom culture that says, hey, my peers, they are valuable, they have valuable thoughts. The peer teachers are not the same people who are just, like gold star, we all secretly hate them. It's not like that. It could be me. I am potentially a peer
Mm-hmm.
teacher. I could be demonstrating mastery and teaching my peers. So establishing that culture of respect for one another as co-learners and co-teachers is a really big component for this being successful. And then also just honestly taking a chill pill and releasing control, which is
Mm-hmm.
so scary sometimes. But I find that not only is it equipping those learners who are the peer teacher in that moment, but it's so valuable for them to hear from other students, just a varying perspective, something different from how I would explain it. And I find that really clicks for some students. They just needed to hear it from someone speaking also in that sixth grade mentality. They needed to hear from a peer. So delegation, I think, is incredibly powerful, not only for the student who is the teacher, but also those who are the recipients of that teaching. And it's pretty awesome to see it. It honestly makes me tear up every time I watch them because they are just incredible. And I think giving them that space to be responsible and that space to learn those interpersonal skills in addition to learning those language writing skills is just a beautiful thing to watch.
This is just another example of how you've made teaching into a more joyful
Mm,
experience, teaching and learning.
yes,
That sounds, I can't imagine watching that. That sounds absolutely amazing and so incredibly rewarding.
yes,
So, the next area that you've identified is choice.
yes. Whew, I I feel this one is where people tend to try to go overboard. They're like, okay, choice. So I have 30 students, I need 30 different things, and then everyone ends up being overwhelmed. So
Hmm.
I think it's really important to obviously have managed choice and to not go overboard with this and not burn yourself out. So, just a few potential ways that this could work in a classroom. One is to do something like a bingo card. Let's say in history, students are learning about our particular event, but the teacher has found like a bazillion resources, right? They found podcasts and videos and articles. Instead of forcing the students to watch videos, if that's just not something that they are able to retain, okay, that's fine. I'm going to put multiple resources onto a bingo card and then you build your bingo. You decide, okay, I want to watch this and I want to read that and kind of build their own learning experience in a way that's going to be meaningful to them. And once again, as the teacher, you have found all of those resources up front. But then in that moment when the students are learning, you kind of are getting to interact with them because they are picking their own way to learn in that moment. And you've already done the front loading yet again of finding those resources in advance. So one way that you can up this and make it even more exciting, which sounds really silly, is stamps. I have found that students just go crazy for stamps. I'm like not even sure what the magic is behind them. But let's say they're completing tasks on their bingo card, just letting them get up out of their seat and go stamp that they completed that task is oddly really fulfilling to them. And it's such a cheap and easy way for them to get excited, at least for sixth graders. That's like the coolest thing ever to stamp their bingo card.
I've heard that from high school teachers as well. They'll use, like, different color stamps to mean different feedback, like, a blue owl means this, a green owl means this, or whatever,
Mm.
like, to give, feedback, and having students stamp their own work all the way up through literally seniors in high school. And I think it's partly just because it's I don't know, like, I think stamps are fun as an adult, like, I like to use stamps, and I think also it's sort of that satisfaction of, like, crossing things off a list, like, it feels like, gives closure to the task.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Another kind of similar thing is I find that, let's say we're doing a performance task and students are able to pick their own path. Like, this person's going to make a wee video, this person's going to be creating a graphic novel, or whatever it is. Um, I find it's really hard to keep track, even if, let's say, there are only three options. It's really hard to keep track of which student is doing which particular path and where they are. And I just found that it was really easy for students to kind of slip through the cracks. And all of a sudden, they're 4 days into it. And I'm like, what are you even doing? I don't know what's happening. So I have created, almost every time I do this, just a massive chart. I print out on an 11 by 17 a roster, and then I have like all the steps listed across the top of the table. And then when students complete a step, they just kind of find that spot on the chart and they match it up with their name, and then they highlight that little cell on the table. And not only is it that same sense of accomplishment and fulfillment, yes, I did this, but it is so easy for you as the teacher to glance at this massive chart and be like, whoa, that person has not highlighted anything, and we're on day 2. That's a quick check in for me to say, okay, did you just forget to highlight, or where are we in the process? And then it also is great because it helps me keep track of who's doing what in terms of the potential choices, but also just to make sure that everyone is moving along in the process. So that's a great way to offer choice without pulling your hair out. You're able to keep track of it all, and they get that sense of accomplishment of highlighting on the chart. And then it looks really cool at the end to see this, massive, colorful chart and know that everyone has completed their performance task. It's really fun in, again, kind of a silly way to just see that accomplishment at the end.
That chart idea is brilliant, and I can see that working even with very young students, first graders, second graders. They understand when you finish this part, it could be a Google form or a Google spreadsheet, or it could be an actual like chart on the front of the room, and they can go up and highlight it.
Yes.
I think that's so great. I love that the kids have total ownership of that. And I love that with this method, you are not trying to be the differentiation whisperer and figure out what, every individual student wants. You're giving managed choice. There's a couple different options which you have spent time front loading. Kids can choose between them and they get to pick what they think is going to work best for them. You don't have to have endless options
Right.
for every single assignment.
Absolutely. And even with this chart idea, it builds in the sense of purposeful movement. It's just a
Yes.
quick, you're up, you're highlighting, you're back. It just is that quick little brain break, even between tasks, for them to have that sort of like mental reward as well as the purposeful movement. I just feel like it's so simple that it feels silly almost, but it is incredible to see how it works, specifically, like you said, with managed choice, and not going berserk with a million options, but still, it just makes life so much easier for you and for them.
Right, because a lot of choice can also be very overwhelming for kids
Yeah.
too. Certain personality types, if you're like, you can do anything you want, or,
Yeah,
here's 10 different ways that you can complete this project, they can end up just sort of shutting down. So I
absolutely.
think these are great tips. So we've talked about cloning yourself via screencasts. We've talked about stations. We've talked about delegating via peer teaching and giving managed choice. Your next area that you've identified for simplifying differentiation is about how you give feedback.
Hmm. I think feedback is the number one strategy for differentiation. And really, the other things that we've talked about are all freeing you up for one on one time with students. If they are going through stations with peer teachers, that's great. You can be floating around potentially, or leading a station and having small groups of students. If you are having them work through screencasting and revising and editing, that's great. It frees you up again to be one-on-one with students. So all of those other things are kind of getting us to this pinnacle of differentiation as being one-on-one with those students, because really you cannot differentiate unless you know them. And if you don't know what they need, then you're just kind of shooting in the dark and saying like, okay, I'm going to try some new strategies and see what happens. And so you have to have that one-on-one time with them to get to know them and to be able to really see what they need. Plus, like we talked about, it really restores your joy in teaching and your joy in your students, getting to spend that one-on-one time with them. I know I had a professor in college who played this song for us that was, I want to know the color of your eyes. And that always just stuck with me, because she said, not only do I want to know the actual physical color of your eyes because we've made eye contact, but I want to know your disposition every day. I want to know what's going on with you, and not get to the end of the day and say, you know what? I didn't have a single meaningful one-on-one conversation with any of my students. That would be a wasted day in her mind. And I really have carried that into my own classroom of trying every day to have those intentional one-on-one, eye to eye, knowing the color of your eyes conversations every day with as many students as possible. And let's say they're working through stations for 5 days. Okay, that's great. I've got 5 days to try to get those intentional interactions with each of my students. I don't have to do all 30 in one day. That would be really hard and not very meaningful because it would be so short. But instead, I have a week of built-in time where I can really invest in knowing the color of their eyes and getting to know what they need, so that my differentiation isn't just me running around like a chicken with my head cut off, but it's meaningful and it is useful for them as learners.
The final strategy that you identified is about thinking through how your mindset impacts the way that you differentiate. How has that factored into your teaching?
I I know that burnout is so real. I mean, let's talk about burnout after this year. It was crazy,
Mm.
but burnout is um, a stealer of joy. It is a robber of your energy and your passion for teaching. And so I think differentiation can often be seen as this big, scary, daunting thing that's so overwhelming to teachers. And instead, we forget to just take it one little step at a time to take care of ourselves. Um, Really, if you are homesick on the day of stations and peer teachers, it's going to be really rough. It's not going to go well because you are the lead learner and you are not there to help run things. So if you're running yourself ragged and getting sick and just not being able to mentally be present, then this whole differentiation thing is a wash. So I think it's important to take those times to celebrate your learners, to take care of yourself. And if that means you can't do everything, then good. Don't do everything. That's not what this is about. I can think of one example. I remember my students were in the middle of a writing process, and I just was feeling exhausted. I was coming into this on a Monday thinking, like, I just don't have the energy to sit down and, like craft these little mini lessons for every writer in my classroom. I just was feeling spent. And I'm looking around my house on Sunday night and I'm like, oh, what can I do? Like, I don't want to call in sick, but I'm just feeling so burnout. And I found these two little like push light buttons that I'd gotten at Walmart. I thought, okay, I'm going to do something with this. So I grabbed a Sharpie, and on one I wrote the word brag, and on the other I wrote the word panic. And I took those into school the next day, and I told all the kids, I said, all right, today we're doing 30-second conferences. When you come up to me, you're the boss. You're going to hit one of these two lights. You're going to hit the brag light, and you're going to take your 30 seconds to tell me the coolest thing you wrote today, the thing you're most proud of that just is going to blow me away. Or you can hit the panic button and you're going to ask for some advice on something that maybe you're stuck on in your writing. And I let them take total control of that day, coming up one at a time, hitting whichever light, matched their purpose for talking with me, having that 30-second conference about their writing. And that was huge. That just changed my whole mindset. It was something so simple. These were like $3 push lights that were sitting in a junk drawer in my house that transformed into differentiation. It was something little, but it was a powerful day of them getting to have ownership of the conversation and also grow, maybe even just in their confidence, or grow in a particular area of writing, and them getting to set that tone was huge. And it wasn't anything big. It wasn't this magnificent thing that I had prepped for hours. It was so simple. And so mindset is key in keeping yourself in mind as well, and taking care of yourself and letting it be okay if it's just simple sometimes.
I think that's such a beautiful creative idea. And I wonder if you can speak to how you do take care of yourself and what kinds of practices and habits you have to open yourself to that kind of creative thinking.
Mm,
Because I know that those kinds of ideas don't come when you're exhausted, burnout, resentful because you're doing things that you don't want to be doing and you've overcommitted yourself or overcomplicated things or set the bar too high. You
mm,
have to be in the right headspace to even be able to come up with that kind of stuff, especially on a weeknight when you're not feeling well. So
right.
how do you set yourself up to think about teaching in this very innovative, creative, and intentional way that you do?
I think boundaries are a huge element of teaching. And that's not just boundaries within your building and saying to your principal, I cannot be the yes person. Um, but it also is boundaries at home. I know for me, like Sundays, it's everything is off. There's nothing on the schedule. It doesn't matter if there is a massive pile of papers to be graded, they are just going to have to wait. And Sunday is the day to just rest and daydream about the week ahead and let those sort of creative juices flow a bit, and get outside and just sort of remember that life exists outside of the school building.
Mm.
I think that's tough to do sometimes. Sometimes it just gets all consuming, and I forget that I am a human, not just a teacher. And having those moments to kind of recenter and do something. I have a teacher friend who has self-care Sundays, and she does like a face mask and sweatpants all day Sunday, and that's just her little thing. So whatever it is, I think it's important to find that thing that reminds you of who you are outside of just your profession. Yes, that's a huge part of who we are as teachers. We take that into our identity so much, I think. Um, but that regrounding of, hey, I am a person outside of this job, and finding something that brings you joy and really opens your brain up to that creativity. I feel like when you stop thinking about school, those creative thoughts have space to actually come into your mind. And for me, that's my Sunday, just taking that time to kind of shut off my brain, and then it's amazing what ideas can flow into it when you give it the space and time to do so.
Yes, I find that same thing. Creating that space for daydreaming,
Mm,
wondering, imagining, creating is so, so important.
yes.
What's one thing that you wish every teacher understood about differentiating without burning out?
Oh, I think I would say to start small and start in an authentic way. And what I mean by that is you have to find what works for you. If the thought of screencasting makes you want to like throw up and crawl in a hole, then maybe don't do screencasting. Um, I find that in the age of Twitter and Pinterest and all these things, comparison can be such
The thief of joy. Yep.
Yes. And I just feel that differentiation is so personal to you, not only as a teacher, but to your students. And so start in a small way that's authentic to you. Trust your intuition. You know your students best. The teacher down the hall who's doing X, Y, and Z, or that thing that you pinned, or that person you follow, they do not know your students. You know them. You know the color of their eyes. You know what they need. And so I would just say to trust that. And if it's small, if it's push lights, on a Sunday night, writing in them on Sharpie because you just need something to get you through Monday, then that's okay. It's okay to have those small little moments and know that that's what your students need. You are in charge of teaching responsively for them. And so just have compassion with yourself, and whatever is authentic to who you are as a teacher is what's going to make the most impact with them, because they will know your joy. They will know your heart behind teaching. They will sense your passion for them and for their learning. And that goes further than any, massive, awesome thing that looks great on the outside. It's so much more authentic when it's true to you and true to who they are and what they need.